All right. I have to ask your second most commonly asked question. What originally sparked your fascination with the dark side, specifically your use of creepy mannequins?
Uh, the mannequins, I have no idea. Um, other than the fact that I think mannequins are pretty creepy, just in general. But I think when you put a bunch of them together, it's it just becomes this mind warp thing. At least it is for me. And in Chasing the Boogeyman, when I wrote about that, I was thinking, what do I need? I know a lot of police officers. I know a couple detectives. So yeah, I've picked their brains before. And people were hoping that that was a true story, that part of it, but which it wasn't. That was one of the handful of things I made up.
Yeah.
Um, but I was just thinking, based on the different things they've told me that, they went into this house, they went into this backyard and they found this and that. I was trying to think what worked best. And for some reason, instead of a lot of the grisly, freaky stories they told me, I thought, you know what? An entire house set up with mannequins in the bathroom, in the living, everywhere is just messed up. So that's what I went with. But as far as the original, my attraction to it,
Hmm.
I think I just came out warped. I came out the weird. My earliest memories. I was the youngest of five. Back in the 70s, and when it was when I was really a child. I was born in 65. I'm an old guy. Um, but like regular TV events like Wizard of Oz, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, they were like big family events. You gathered around just like, Charlie Brown Christmas and all that. It came on
Hmm.
once a year. You missed it, you were screwed. But I remember those early things. I was immediately attracted. Everyone was like, "Oh, isn't the Yellow Brick Road beautiful?" And "Oh, I love the Scarecrow and so sensitive." And I was like, "Man, there's flying monkeys." I had nightmares for
Yep.
a month. The haunted forest with the branches that came and grabbed
Yep.
you. I love that. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I was fascinated with the whole thing. But the child napper with the net,
Hmm.
that dude messed me up for a while. Um, so there was that instant attraction, and I was, it was a love hate thing because I was scared to death. My mom was constantly saying, "We are not going to let you watch this stuff anymore," because I was an active kid back then, no video games, none of that stuff. So I'd be out on a Saturday, playing wiffle ball, football, whatever. And come noon, I'd sprint home because it was the start of Creature Double Feature
Yeah.
on cable. And I had to see those back-to-back horror films every Saturday from noon to four, and it just grew from there. If I was at a yard sale and I saw a bunch of comics, I was either going to grab the ones that were like Western comics or
Hmm.
scary,
Hmm.
unknown, those kind of things. I was not going to grab the historical classics illustrated unless they had a cowboy and an Indian on the front or something.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it was just a natural thing.
Yeah. I have to say, what you did in becoming the boogeyman with those mannequins, especially that one reveal, that was
Oh, and the second book,
yeah, in your
yeah.
second book, yeah. And speaking of your second book, since that's coming out, do you mind giving the audience just a little bit about that sequel, mainly the premise before we dive in?
Yeah. Um, it essentially it opens with, it opens in present day. If everyone remembers,
Hmm.
the first book, was set in 1983, or no, it was at 88, I think. Yeah, the book I'm writing now is 1983. Oh, between that and post COVID hit, I'm like, all day I've been, screwing up. But yeah, the first book was set in 88, and the end of it, the epilogue, brought us back to the present at that time,
Hmm.
which was 2021, I think. So this book is set in 2023. It's set in the present. I've written about everything that transpired in that first book, and there's been a movie made of Chasing the Boogeyman. The book hit the bestseller list. A lot of the stuff that happened was true. A lot of
Yeah.
it is true. Hopefully, it will be. Hopefully, there will be a movie. Blah blah blah. Um, but it's kind of made me into like this mini celebrity in that I was able to move to a bigger house, with some property, and people know who I am. And with the good came the bad. With the bigger paychecks came the people, as they often do. Once you achieve a certain level of success, that the people come out of the grass to snipe. So there's some different groups, some anti-violence groups who are not friends with me. There are lots of blogs and bulletin boards saying, Chizmar, he made it on the blood of those victims. That house he lives in, that's the house that the boogeyman built, that kind of thing. So that kind of sets the tone. I'm a happily married family guy still. Carly Albright's still in the picture. My wife takes a bigger role now because she's not my girlfriend anymore. She's, my wife. She's
Mm-hmm.
stuck with me. And essentially, the opening chapter, something very bad happens,
Yeah.
which I don't want to give away. But the end of the first chapter is the reason that the sequel came about. I had no intentions of writing one, but one day I was mowing the lawn, true story, and I was
Yep.
not driving into the pond. And the idea for the first chapter came with the end. The end of the first chapter is a reveal that I hope people will go, holy shit.
Mm-hmm.
And it ties directly to the first book. And that was the idea that came to me full fledged, and that's why I decided to write the sequel. So, it's not a very good synopsis that I gave. Sorry about that, but it's essentially, I'm in a different place, financially, family wise, everything, than that young college, graduate. But Joshua Gallagher, the Boogeyman, is still very much in my life. He's in prison, and he ends up becoming involved in this, and there's a little Silence of the Lambs there. I tried to make
Mm-hmm.
sure there wasn't too much. And hopefully there's a lot of the same heart that was in the first book is in this one. I tell people the first book was kind of my love story to my hometown and the family I was born into. And this one's kind of my love story to, my wife and my kids, but also the struggle that I think a lot of us creators go through, which is why are we doing it,
Yeah.
and why do we continue to explore the dark side of humanity?
Yeah.
And that's something I wrestle with throughout the book, and I try to be really honest about. And I know at times I make myself look like an idiot, but I tried to be as accurate as I could be, and I had a lot of fun doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, so this second book is set present time, and
Right.
having that story so close to the present, what sort of challenges did you face when you were writing now as opposed to writing the original when it was set decades before and kind of setting that tone?
The more obvious ones were just simply, things like I'm at least supposedly I'm a whole lot wiser. Um, I'm more mature and kind of balanced, but I kind of, tip you in kind of early that I'm really not. I am more mature, and in some ways I'm wiser, but I'm just so caught up in this story and in this web of Joshua Gallagher's that kind of common sense goes out the window at times.
Mm-hmm.
And as the book envelops, you'll see more and more reveals as to far as how deep down the rabbit hole I am. And then there were, things like technological things. We had cell phones this time. We didn't have them back
Yep.
then. And we had Google, and we had social media plays a huge part of this book as far as, the word getting out and news being leaked and that kind of thing. But mainly it came more from that kind of internal engine that's inside of me as the main character. It was more, it was just interesting because I was trying to write it from the viewpoint of who I am now.
Mm-hmm.
So just like I was then, people say, well, how true could it be once you introduce the murderers in Chasing the Boogeyman? And I said, I tried really hard to make it as accurate as I could and to be as honest as I could with the reader as to how I thought I would act.
Mm-hmm.
I did not try to, you've read the first book. I certainly didn't posture myself as any kind of hero. I poked a lot of fun at myself through the cops, and Carly Albright is constantly there to remind me that I'm just a dumb boy. And her and my wife are there in this one to kind of do the same at times, but still with love. But yeah, it was just interesting because I was, instead of being that 22-year-old, I was in my 50s and trying to be as honest as I could again about how I'd be if my family was in danger, and possibly I was. And, a lot of people saying, Rich, you're not as smart as you think you are. This is dangerous. So yeah, that was the biggest challenge, is just that, whoa, you would think it would have been easier and looking back would have been more difficult, but for some reason it wasn't.
Yeah. And so you had mentioned before that Chasing the Boogeyman was intended to be one and done. And then that idea
Mhm.
hit you and you knew where the story was going to go. But I'm curious, like, what was that writing process like going back to a book that you had totally planned on being done with? And
Mhm.
now there's a potential for a third book, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
Yes, yeah, one way or another, eventually.
Yep.
Um, yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I actually had to do like I had to like create character lists and do all that stuff that real writers do, and that I'm usually like, ah, hell, I'm just flying by the seat of my pants, and I'll catch it later. But I had to be more careful.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it was, it was more of a challenge than the first book, and I really wanted to hang on to that kind of nostalgic feel. And it made me want to write the Edgewood Looking Back book that they're, for the readers who haven't, seen the galley or don't know anything about it yet. And Becoming the Boogeyman, interjected in between each chapter, there's either interviews with key players, Joshua Gallagher himself, or a prison guard, or a relative or a classmate, that kind of thing. Or there's excerpts from a fictional book called Edgewood Looking Back, which, by my explanation in the second book, it was spurred by the positive reaction to all the nostalgic, coming of age stuff that I wrote in Chasing the Boogeyman, which was true. I heard from so many people that said, you wrote a serial killer book that had heart and nostalgia, and it worked. And I'm like, yeah, I have no idea. There was no plan on my part. It's just the way it needed to be written. Um, so I knew from the beginning I wanted to do that. In addition to having photos again and stuff, I wanted it to be a different book, and I was just keep my fingers crossed that it wouldn't come across as too busy, and that it would, kind of be seamless, and it would just be like, well, here's a glimpse of what made this guy who he is,
Yeah.
and now we're back to, scary stuff. So yeah, it was different challenges, but just a lot of fun. I mean, both Boogeyman books, I doubt, other than writing with King and my son, I doubt I'll have that much fun ever writing, books again, just because so much of it is pulled from my real life, and I'm able to, visit with my family and my parents who are gone. And, I get to write about my friends who are still in my life, today. And that's a lot of fun. Most people don't get a chance to do that.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I personally refuse to believe that Cheesapalooza is not real. But in terms of the real life stories that you have incorporated into this story, which one was maybe one of the hardest ones to put down on paper to revisit?
Before we go, since you mentioned it, I don't know if you can see
Good, it
that.
is real.
There are some T-shirts which I got made
Oh yeah.
for a couple of these signings that I'm doing, which, are the T-shirts came out of the book.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, as far as the most difficult, those were in the first book.
Hmm.
The Chasing the Boogeyman, writing about myself as a child. Um, there were two stories in that book, that I never really that are 100% true, but I'd never written about them before. And for me, they were the equivalent of in the novella The Body by Stephen King, when he writes about seeing that deer in the morning on the train tracks, and he says, it's this beautiful poetic scene, much more elegant than I could have ever, put it. But at the end, he just simply says, and I've never written about it until now.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of writers have those kind of hidden, moments, that they've kept to themselves, and they'll either keep them until they're no longer here, or they'll decide, okay, the time's right to share it. And in Chasing the Boogeyman, there was the moment where my father and I walked up the street and we saw the Christmas lights, and there was just that moment of kind of feeling safe and okay and happy, and just, having those childlike emotions that are so pure. That was one, and I've always remember that, and always thought, yeah, maybe one day I'll write about it. And then the big one was in Chasing the Boogeyman, when I was sledding with my friends and they all went home, and it was just me in the snow, and there was the hush and the glow of the house lights, and I'm there. People said, did that really happen? I've spoken, many places, and that's question's been asked a half dozen times or so. And I'm like, yeah, I was that weird kid, man. It was like, that's why I love the Wonder Years so much, because people were like, oh, the Wonder Years was great, but most kids didn't think like Kevin Arnold. And I'm like, yeah, I did. um and that was one of those moments where I just thought, wow, this is special, and this moment's going to pass, and
Hmm.
everything's going to pass. Before we know it, we're all going to be moving away, and all the guys I just saw that I just called bad names, and they, jumped on my back sliding down the hill and all that stuff, they're going to be gone, and some of them I'm not going to see anymore. And it was just this moment of realizing I was going to grow up and I was going to leave this place. And it was really powerful. And it came hand in hand with, I'm going to write about this. I'm going to write about how I see the world. And I was young, I don't know what I said I was in the book, but it was accurate, whether it was 12 or 14 or 15 or somewhere in there. But that was a really, pen to paper was really easy. There weren't a lot of polishes done on that section, but it was hard to kind of, right up until the very end, I was like, does it stay? Does it stay?
Yeah.
And that was one of those moments where it was just like, yeah, I've got to let it stay, because this is the book where I do that.
Yeah.
I'm telling my friends' secrets. I'm telling my own. Um, and I want the reader to really, really get an idea of what Edgewood was to us.
Yeah.
So he can understand what this guy invading our safety net and our whole world as an adolescent was like for us to experience. So yeah, that's a great question, because those were the two moments. And in the second book, and actually in the first book, there was the moment where I was looking down the steps and my dad was up getting ready for work. People always mention that one too. And that was another one.
Mm-hmm.
I had never written about it, but that one wasn't as difficult. I knew I really wanted to put that in there because of a lot of the interactions with my dad. But yeah, the second book, I don't feel like I gave up as many of those. I gave them all up in the first book. But I still put a lot of, heart in there, and a lot of honesty, and hopefully that comes across.
Yeah, I definitely think it does. I mean, the way that you write and intertwining truth and like this thriller story that's coming along, it reads honestly like a true crime podcast. Like, I can't believe how the style functions. It's wild to
Awesome.
me. But it's so
Awesome.
funny because I start that book, I read that first section that says this is fiction. I was still Googling names. I still looked people up and I was like, this has to be real. This person you're talking about has to be real. So as someone
That
who
makes me happy.
good, I'm glad. And as someone who like toes that line between fact and fiction, what advice do you have to someone that's looking to do the same? Because like I feel like the way that you write is so unique, and I'm just curious, what advice would you have to someone that's looking to emulate that?
I would just say, it's that's another really good question, and I'm stammering because I think the way I would approach it with someone who asked me that question would be, don't so much look to emulate it, but find the story that in order, or actually, if you want to emulate, if you enjoyed the storytelling process so much that you want to try your own hand at it, then you got to find out what's most important to you from
Mm-hmm.
your life. And I talked about this recently to a group, and I said, I think a good way of doing that would, and I've never done it, so I could be full of it, but I think would be journaling.
Yeah.
Keep a journal for a while, and what you find, and just write about anything. It doesn't have to be important. That's the thing, and I think that's why journaling is a great idea. Is it doesn't have to, because I think people who journal, and I could be wrong, they don't write about big things all the time. A lot of times it's just about what they had for lunch or what they saw when they were on break at school, or if they're a teacher or a student or whatever. But I said, I think if you do that and you write honestly, and that's your goal, is just write honestly every day for a couple months, I think you'll find something. You'll find stories in there. And that's something else I've told people who, say, I've always wanted to be a writer. I write little paragraphs, I write sentences, I write, little sketches here and there, but I can't put something cohesive together. And I always say journal, because I
Mm-hmm.
think what you'll find is something in there that wants to be expanded. And that's how you're going to find your story. And there's no pressure because it's coming from your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that'd be a cool way to do it, is to kind of find that nugget in there and then just run with it.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I can see that. And
yeah,
that's really good advice. That's one that I don't do enough of.
yeah. I mean, somebody else asked me, well, have you ever had a writer's block? And I'm like, not really. I've had like the kind of writer's block that comes younger, just from being intimidated, where it's like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, stop trying to be so perfect and just get to the end. That's the key.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not Hemingway, dude. So stop trying to be this or that and reinvent the wheel. Just right. And I had that, at times, at a younger age. But yeah, I'm like, I think if you have writer's block and you are someone who's used to having a pretty decent output, start journaling. I think that would work. I mean, if that's what I plan on doing, if it hits me, I'm knocking on my desk. But I just feel like there's nuggets in there to find. And because before that, I put a lot of myself in stories, but I think honestly, 90% of the time, subconsciously, there was no. It wasn't until Chasing the Boogeyman that I thought, okay, I'm writing about me, and people have thought I've done it. I've had people say, hey, that story was about me and you. That story was about my brother and me, and I'm like, no, sorry. Um, but yeah, so yeah, I've had two books of it now. So yeah, it's been fun. But I again, it's a little grueling when you're finished, because then you're like, man, I don't want to hear about myself anymore. I don't want to write about myself anymore. And when I got to the end of this book, you kind of alluded to the fact that it is open ended, so there's possibly a third. I had no intentions, but I was like, boom, that's just the way it ended. That's what happened in my mind. I was like, this is what happened. Um, instead of completely happily ever after, there's this little thing, and son of a gun, we might have to go back again,
Yeah.
and we'll see. But yeah, I actually told my editor and my agent, I'm like, after this book, I'm not writing about myself anymore. And then I turned it in.
Yep.
Neither one of them
Yeah.
said you lied.
Yeah, and I mean, without spoiling the ending at all, there was such perfect like steps leading up to that little tiny hook at the end that it
Yeah.
honestly like it didn't feel like like a shocker as much as like a oh no, like I'm ready for this next book to come through. So I thought that was really well addition. So I'm glad that you had that in
Thank
there.
you. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I'm glad you said that too, because that's how it felt for me. I'm like, well, there's going to be some readers who, and I've heard from them already, from the ARCs or from NetGalley, they're like, oh my God, it floored me. And then others felt more like I felt when I was creating it, which was just this sense of, you
yep.
nod your head and that makes total sense, son of a
Yep.
gun. So yeah, I'm glad you had that reaction.
And in becoming the boogeyman, because it's set in modern day and because you as the character have released Chasing the Boogeyman in reality and in this story, and there's been documentaries and podcasts and whatnot. And I know that when you were on this podcast last time with Jay Thorne, you were talking about the potential of some kind of documentary. So is there any chance that we'll see a podcast or a documentary with Chasing the Boogeyman or with this one that you can tell us?
Yeah, you know what? There still is that possibility. You know, with the first book, I really wanted my oldest son, Billy, who's a really good writer and a filmmaker, and I really wanted him to do that. And it became a time issue that we couldn't do it. I know it made my publisher a little nervous, but I was like, oh, that's okay. They'll get over it. But it just didn't work out. But I so badly wanted that to be on the internet for people to find and go, wait a minute, I Googled this and it wasn't true, but what the hell is this? Nobody would put this much time and money into creating something fake. So now, yeah, it's kind of evolved into the idea. I would love to do like a 6 or 8 episode podcast, which I could be a guest on, and I could bring in several of the same friends or actors who were photographed in the books to come and appear, and just the different roads that they could take in discussing murders and Joshua Gallagher in prison and all of that. Somebody could have, I corresponded with Joshua Gallagher, and this is what he wrote me. So yeah, that's something that I would love to do, and I don't have, what I really need is someone to come to me and say, hey, if you foot the bill, and the bill is reasonable, I think it's great, and I'll produce it, and we'll treat it as, with just all these different guests that come on, and we can talk about these murders, and we can spread it out over 6 weeks, and because I think it would help promote the book wonderfully, and I just think it'd give me that little satisfaction of being able to play Blair Witch, which is what I wanted to do with the first book, and I couldn't, because that disclaimer, I probably said it the first time. I love my publisher, Ed Schlesinger. My editor is top notch. The guy is brilliant, and has made me so much better, and is just kind and generous, and but they wouldn't let me. They made sure that disclaimer was in there, and I remember telling Ed, well, you have to write it because I won't write it. And he did, and they slapped a novel on the front of the cover, so they stole a little of the thunder there, but it worked out fine for all of us, and the podcast would be my chance to kind of play in that sandbox again. So I think it could come. The timing would have to be right, and I'd have to find someone who wanted to do a decent amount of work and get paid for it, but not a lot, and make it work. And I just think it'd be so much fun.
Agreed. And I feel like it adds to that extra content. And I mean, the images that you have in the book really sell it so much. Like, that's the reason why I Googled. And I know that from your author notes, like, you guys set that up. I think you were in one of the images, you're under a sheet or something like that. But I'm just curious, like, what's the process to craft those images and really craft that extra content for the book?
Well, what's funny is it reminds me of, I've done some film stuff, earlier in 2000, I guess 2007 in there. I don't know, but I had like a 5 or 6 year period where I wrote a lot of scripts, and we produced some films and did some indies, and we did some television. John Sheck, my writing partner, and I. So it was kind of like talking to some of those filmmakers, where some of the shots were meticulously planned out and really thought out, and then some of them were just like, hey, that's perfect, pull over the car, you get out. You don't have the 35 millimeter then, and you don't have the actual movie camera, so you're just like, my cell phone will do. And you take a picture, and it ends up working great. So it was a little mixture of everything. And then you had your adventure days where you rode around and you looked for visuals that matched what you wrote about. And in a lot of cases, I wrote about, real places. So we just went there. And then in some cases, the real place wasn't quite, visual enough to leave an impression, at least in my mind. So we had to fake it with something else. But yeah, it was fun. I mean, it was a lot like, making a little film. And getting my friends involved, and being able to say, hey, can you do me a favor, can you go to a thrift store and find something that looks like it, a detective would wear nowadays, but it just can't be too nice, and blah blah blah. And then my one buddy's a fire guy, so he's got the badge, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. And Billy and I had fun with it. And in that shot that you talked about with me under the sheet, I was like, my entire body was cramping, and I'm like, get the duct tape off me. So a lot of it, not nearly as technical as I should make it out to be. And yeah, just fun. And at the same time, you know what? Those photos really did form the thread for me to my true crime, interest in true crime in a lot of those books, because I've spoken about it a lot, where those photos in the true crime books really have an impact on me. And I'm always quick to point out, we're not talking about bloody, gory, violent photos. Most of the time they're, I talked about this recently, the one shot that just haunted me, which was this patch of grass behind a shed in this suburban neighborhood, and the grass was flattened down, and you could see an old can in the weeds, and it was where this girl's life ended. And she had everything in the world in front of her. And I just remember staring at that photo, and I don't even remember which book it's in right now, but I remember staring at that photo. It was those commonplace things that really hit me. And so I know while we were taking these photos, a lot of times, those feelings would return, and it would be instantly kind of a somber mood, because it was like, wow, I'm glad we're faking this, but the idea didn't come out of my head. The idea came from all my experience with things that really did happen. So yeah. But with that said, I'm glad you said the photos are what made you Google, because that was the plan. Don't put them all in one section like they are in true crime books. I was like, I want at the end of every chapter, because when they read it, I want them to then see the picture, and I want to be there, that momentary question of, wait a minute, this is a book. This is make-believe. So where the hell did this picture come from? And what do you mean this is Carly Albright? I thought she looked a little different, but they're saying this is Carly. So yeah, that was a joyous thing from the first book, is just hearing from people who constantly went back and Googled, and the photos messed them up and gave them nightmares. I was like behind my desk, kind of gleeful about that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I will have nightmares, but I appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate you reading it and having me on again.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.